Hey, what's happening, CSTers? Welcome to a special edition of Cincinnati Soccer Talk. I'm Nick Stribling, pleased to be with you here on this Tuesday evening. Not the day we were hoping for, FCC fans. FC Cincinnati manager Ron Jans has resigned from the club, and FC Cincinnati held a press conference today downtown, as well as a conference call for the national journalists to call in and speak with the club. So tonight is about talking about what occurred, trying to figure out what occurred, and about looking forward, FC Cincinnati fans. Obviously, a change is going to be happening. We know that Yohan DeMay is the new acting head coach for FC Cincinnati. So we'll talk about that, as well as taking your questions online on our chat. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter tonight. For those of you wondering if you can call in, we are not taking phone calls tonight. We will be taking your questions via the chat. So if you're watching live, we appreciate you tuning in live and watching. So make sure you send in your questions. We will do our best to answer them. If you're not watching live and you're listening to this after the fact, again, you can always get in touch with us at feedback@CincinnatiSoccerTalk.com. All right, let's welcome in my guests tonight. I will start with Brian Weigel. Brian, how are you?
That's a loaded question there, pal. I should ask, how are you, sir?
I'm not going to lie, I'm a little stressed. The last 48 hours have been a little rough, just kind of watching what's going on social media. And by the way, what we're dealing with is nothing compared to what Jeff Birding and Gerard Nightcamp and anybody at FC Cincinnati is dealing with today. So that pales very much in comparison. But this is a situation I didn't think we would see in 2020. I just didn't.
Well, didn't think we'd see it in 2020, but it might have been something we've seen kind of similarly in the past. So whoever we hire as a head coach, and I would preface this with this guy, we need to take a big fat Sharpie marker in either circle or black out February 17th. Want to know why that specific reason is?
Why is that?
Not only was it the day that Ron Jans turned in his resignation letter, several years ago was also the same day where the news was broken that John Harkes was no longer the head coach of FC Cincinnati.
No way.
Same day.
Shut the front door.
2/17 will be a day that goes down in infamy in FC Cincinnati lore. I think it's like Black Friday, the stock market crash, all rolled in one. 2/17. I think we need to make shirts or something to eliminate 2/17 from the calendar.
I did not realize that. That is incredible.
It's something special. I do want to give a shout out to follower Harry Ramical on Twitter. He brought that up to me today, so that was something.
Wow. Well, thanks for that interesting tidbit right off the bat, Bri. Glad you're here with us tonight and bringing the info. Let's welcome in your twin brother, Brad. Brad, how are you?
How am I supposed to follow that up? I don't have any interesting tidbits. I'm just Brian's brother here.
It's always been that way, pal.
Yeah, but I do have to pick a bone with you, Subes.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Yeah. So today, we were all talking on our Slack group, and we were all talking about it's a tough time for all the people in Cincinnati and this, that, and the other. And you went, "Hey, I live in Toledo." It's like you're forgetting where you're from, man. It's like you're trying to distance yourself a little bit. What's up?
This is just, it's crazy. I never envisioned being that guy. Like, you always see these stories happening around the world. Like, when it's happening to your club and to your town, it's like, what do you say, right? When fans of these other MLS teams are messaging you and posting things on social media that you follow and that you respect and you like, and what are you supposed to say right now? It's just really tough. I am from Cincinnati, born and raised, proud to be a Cincinnatian. I just happen to live 3 hours north, Brad.
Well, I appreciate you, Subes. We're glad to have you.
Yes, and we're doing this live, just like you've always asked.
Yes. I've been missing it. I was telling some of these people don't see this off you, but I feel you just take it up a notch when you're live, just a little bit extra.
We'll certainly do our best tonight. Let's also welcome in our resident coach, Coach Goff, Brad Goff, another Brad on the show tonight. Brad, how are you doing?
Man, I got nothing here, Subs. You got the two Weigels just taking over the show. I think that you and I can just kick back and let them toss it back and forth. We'll just watch with our mouths halfway ajar and just wonder if this is going to be a beautiful train wreck or something that gets us all out at the other end alive.
We will certainly do our best this evening to do just that. Let's kind of recap today's events, shall we? Obviously, we got the news early this morning that Ron Jans had tendered his resignation to FC Cincinnati. Club issued a statement a little bit later on this morning in the wake of that resignation. As Major League Soccer's investigation unfolded and some themes emerged, Ron offered his resignation, and we agreed that it was the best course of action for everyone involved with FC Cincinnati. We placed the utmost importance on a strong culture within our club, beginning in our locker room, and that every person connected with FC Cincinnati feels valued, respected, and trusted. Racial and cultural diversity is a major part of what makes the game of soccer so special, and we place the highest priority on respecting everyone, every person involved in our game. This includes absolutely everyone associated with our club, from our locker room and front office, all the way through to our fans, Club President Jeff Birding said. As we mentioned earlier, Johan DeMay will serve as the club's interim head coach, while Gerard Nightcamp begins the international search for a new head coach. Then, a little bit later on this morning, we got this from the Cincinnati Enquirer's Pat Brennan, who was very kind enough to join us on the podcast last night. He actually spoke with Ron Jans, and Ron had this to say. That has never been a question for me. If I hurt feelings, even if it was clumsy and not with bad intentions, I really apologize. That has never been a question, so I don't feel guilty, but I really apologize if I hurt feelings. When you have things like this, you want to be with your family, but you've got to believe me. I had hundreds, maybe even 1,000 now reactions from Holland that support me, Jan said. When I look back now, I don't want to remember only the last 3 days, but I want to have the big picture, and the big picture is that we had a really good time, and I met so many good people in America in the club. They told me that I made a big contribution to create a better culture, but in the end, in the locker room, yeah, you can ask your questions if I did it in there. I think for a lot of players, yes. For some players, maybe not, but I loved my stay, and I wish FC Cincinnati all the best. With Carl and Martha Lindner, I like them so much, and I wish them all the best, and all the people in the club the same, because I had a great time, but some terrible days at the end. I think in this situation, it's the best to make this decision. Having said all of that, with all the news and the press conference that went down today, before we get started further into this conversation tonight here on the show, we do want to mention that we did reach out to FC Cincinnati tonight and invited them to come on the show, but they did respectfully decline today. So, with that said, FC Cincinnati now on, I guess it's the fourth or fifth coaching search now after Ron Jans tendered his resignation. We still don't have all the facts. A lot of hearsay, a lot of quotes and comments that came out today from the Players Association. But we don't know what exactly happened. We've got two accounts, basically. We've got the account from Jeff Birding at the press conference, and then what Ron Jans has been saying to Pat Brennan at the Enquirer. So the right course of action occurred here, Bri, correct? I mean, I think we're all on the same page here that that we're going to get past this.
Yeah, I think we said something similar on the show last night, that there had to be a path forward. What he said, regardless of how, the people in the Netherlands view it, it's wrong here. Regardless of the context, using that word is inappropriate in his situation. We don't know all the facts, but I think it's fairly easy to at least point out that it was wrong. And the fact, that Major League Soccer, the MLSPA, as well as FC Cincinnati did their investigation, according to all three parties, more events occurred where he offended somebody. And, at some point, if, there's just a fracture in the locker room, it's best to get him out of there. And I think that was the correct move. Unfortunate. I think he seemed like a great person. There didn't seem to be a track record of prior offenses, at least with this subject. So it's unfortunate, but I do believe that the situation called for his dismissal.
I'm going to throw it to you, Brad. and I'll try to differentiate the two of you here. I'll obviously call you coach tonight, but Brad Weigel, I'll throw it to you now. I think, Brian kind of said it best. Maybe you, unfortunately, have to follow him once again here. But there was just no way forward, right? I mean, it's been very clear with what's been said after the resignation today alone that there is definitely a fracture between the club and Jans and the players.
Yeah, clearly there's a fracture. When you're a leader of a club and you don't have the entire respect of the team, the organization, you've lost that locker room. I think he's been around enough teams to know that it's really an untenable situation. If he were to have headed back into that locker room and then not had all the buy-in of the players, his message isn't going to get crossed. Players might not fully execute which plan he's trying to do. It's just not a good situation. He said it himself that he's a loud, boisterous guy, and with him having lost the confidence of some of the players, he couldn't be the coach that he wants to be. And I think too, when you hear about some of the as Jeff Berding said, themes where he was invoking some of those racial terms, I think it's just best for all parties that you move on and get a clean break. And FC Cincinnati is still a young club. They got a big season ahead. You got an even bigger 2021, and I think that's the key for this club, is making sure they're in the best situation possible. Yes, this season, but then heading to that brand new stadium where they can create that big splash going forward.
And let's not just say everything. The reason why he's out is a racial theme. There very well may have been other instances, whether it's alienating players, such as the whole Adi incident that they had at the end of last year when Fernando Adi was absolutely furious that he wasn't given an opportunity to play. I think he threw Nijkamp as well as Jans under the bus with that situation. It seems like this spring it's been Maddox, and how he's not in the club's plans. How many times has Jans repeated that? And I don't know what has filtered outside of that, but I mean, he's definitely been a divisive figure on that point. I guess you could say, very brash, very blunt in how he treats players, and that's not something normally seen here. Is that something that maybe could have thrown off the FO and quite a few players? That's something that absolutely could have happened.
All right, Coach, you've been in a locker room before. Obviously, you've dealt with divides, I'm sure, in your locker rooms or things that have come up. Maybe not to this extent, clearly, but was there a path forward?
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is, as a coach, I've said things that have offended my players before, to not to this extent, as you said, but there have been a few times when I've had captains come up to me and say, look, coach, this wasn't taken the right way, or you offended this player. The bottom line is when you're talking to people that have different experiences than you're not always going to know. And I'm not going to comment on whether Ron knew or not. That's not my point here. The point is the path forward from there only happens if you're willing to take responsibility. And taking responsibility and apologizing can't have a caveat. You can't say, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. That's a caveat. Or, I didn't have any bad intentions, but I really apologize if you were offended. That just doesn't work. I mean, the only way forward is to build trust. The only way to build trust is to look your players in the eye and say, look, guys, I've never been through this. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said that, and I won't do it again. No buts or no, I didn't mean it. Just, I'm sorry. And that's what you have to do. And Ron didn't do that. So was there a way forward? I mean, we'll never know, because Ron, I think, kind of planted his flag and died on that hill.
Great point, Coach.
I go back to the comments he made to Pat Brennan at the Enquirer, and this really stuck out to me when I read it the first time. I had to read it again just to make sure I didn't misread it. But he said, I don't feel guilty. That, whether you meant to do it or not, you've offended somebody in your locker room. And to say that you don't feel guilty, that struck a chord with me, Bri.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't even know what to say when your coach is in this situation and he doesn't feel guilty. Maybe it's a poor choice of words again from Jans, but when you saw that from him, what that had to have gone through your mind too. Like, did he really just say that?
Yeah, and not that this is a I'm not trying to be apologetic for this for Jans, even though I still feel highly of him at a certain point. This is the difference in his culture, whether from coming from the Netherlands to here, and that's just very unfortunate that he can't be more contrite in this situation and own his mistake. But at some point, is what we were saying with the locker room and the different types of people, being in charge, being the CEO of the team, you're held to an extremely high standard. And if you can't meet that and you're not comfortable in this environment, I don't necessarily want you being the manager of FC Cincinnati if you don't feel like you can do the role. And he clearly feels like he's not set up to be the right person here anymore. And I'm at least glad we're moving on now.
Trying to catch my breath here.
Well, a lot of dialogue around here, fellas. Let's lighten up a little bit. We got some questions out here on we can answer for you guys.
It's a it's a tricky subject to really tackle. It's something that it's not something we have faced here in Cincinnati as far as the soccer scene goes. So, man, I guess as a club, as a fan base, I think the most troubling thing I've seen over the last couple of days is, and we're talking about divide in the locker room, but now all of a sudden there's a divide amongst the fans, and that's not what the club needs at this moment. 11 days until the season kicks off in New Jersey. That's, I guess, been the biggest shock to me.
Don't everybody just jump in on that one, guys.
I will say this, the divide amongst the fans, I think, is probably symptomatic of just something we're seeing all over the place these days. It's people have opinions about tolerance, and not about whether people should be tolerant or not, but how tolerant should people be and how offended should people be. And I think that the thing to refocus us and move us forward is, again, to say, like, we can sit here and argue about what happened and what should have happened. But number one, we don't know all the facts. And because the MLS is notoriously closed-lipped, tight-lipped, we're not going to know all the facts. So we can sit here and bicker about all the facts that we don't know, or we can say, look, a coach said something that hurt somebody else's feelings, and now we're moving on from that coach. Like, the key that we have to focus on is the divide we're feeling as fans. That's the same divide is happening in the locker room as we speak. And we need to support the team, because the team's going to have to find a way to come together. And if fans can't do it, you better bet those guys that have to rely on each other out on the pitch aren't going to be able to do it.
I think one thing that unites all the fans right now is just a tremendous sense of disappointment. We were all, with the signings of Kadia, Kubo, Regatin, I think we were all feeling very optimistic. And this is just another thing that has gone wrong to our club over the last couple of years. I mean, let's be honest. There have been way too many of these moments that this club is starting to run afoul of players' associations. You got you've had this scenario. You had issues with Audi. You had was it Heinemann's issue? You've had way too many instances where this club has had a black guy and gotten in its own way of achieving success. And I think that's something that, as fans, we should be disappointed about. But we should also, I think, in turn, look back at the club and the front office and start to demand some accountability, start to demand some, just a change a little bit. I'm not saying that some of these FO people have to lose their jobs, but I'm just saying, like, we cannot continue to have these stupid mistakes that, in my mind, are extremely preventable. And as a fan base, I think we can unify together and expect more from our club and expect, a positive direction going forward.
On and off the field, and whether
both.
It's promotions or whatever, there's a lot of things that we can do. So, honestly, I think that kind of boiling down to this is that everybody needs to kind of get on the same page. That you saw, like today, when Paul Doherty came and just slayed people. He asked that question, how did you blow this so badly? And Jeff kind of looked at Gerard and is like, hey, you can answer that one. I'm like, did he just throw him under the bus? I'm like, are they on the same page? And that's that I'm just like really like nervous, like that we're on a different page here, and whether that's the leadership in the club or the leadership of the club and the fans or the players. Like hell, in the locker room, Vanderwerf was discussing today like his anger and disappointment in that Ron didn't deserve that, and different players might be feeling different ways. So I mean, you clearly have some division now. Who's going to be that person to unify everybody? And that's what I'm really interested to see. In that first game in New York, is it going to be Vanderwerf? Is it going to be Lacadia? Is it going to be Waston? What's going to be that factor that really starts unifying us?
And that was my biggest fear. I think it's going to have to be somebody who is not a typical suspect because, the team captain is already going to have his loyalists, right? The other strong leader that's not a captain, be it Vanderwerf or whoever else, is going to have a faction of people that are behind him. Johan de May is going to have the people who kind of supported the current administration to begin with and the people who didn't. It's going to have to be somebody who might have that leadership internally, but has never really stood up to and hasn't really picked a side yet, whether it's a new player or whether it's just a new leader stepping up and saying, look, guys, like, I know I haven't been too vocal before, but this is enough. And we're not going to know who that guy is, but it's going to have to be somebody. I just don't see the team being able to function as a cohesive unit without that.
I was going to say, you could look at one thing that might be a unifying factor. I think, it could be, you said you could be looking for different leaders in the locker room, but honestly, I think it's going to come down to a lot of self-preservation of these players. You've got a lot of players on, like Lacadia, he's on a 5 or 6 month loan looking to prove his spot here. You've got a lot of players entering their final year of the deal. So there's still a lot of incentive for these FC Cincinnati players. Yes, they've had issues with the management, but they can still get around each other as a team and fight for each other. Because look, there's a lot of money on the line for these guys, especially with the new salary cap. More allocation money's open to these guys. There's still plenty of reasons for this team to turn around, get it together, do well, and then in the end earn themselves a lot of money. Because in the end, that's what a lot of these guys are here for.
Well, self-preservation, I would say, didn't necessarily help them last year. Not to squash your point there, but I mean, the unifying factor could also be a new coach. That's why I feel like a lot of people. I feel that Gerard needs to get out there, interview people, and get a guy in here in the next 2 weeks. I mean, we need somebody. What's going to be more unifying than somebody who's like a neutral arbiter in this situation?
That was probably one of the more disappointing things from today's press conference, right? You hear them talking about, this could take another year before they do this. And that, to me, was that was really disheartening. I get why, because you don't want to rush into this. But at the same time, like, I don't want to wait another year for another head coach. And with all the talent brought in this offseason, like, they built this roster to be competitive in the Eastern Conference this year, right? They brought in a designated player in Lacadia, Kubo. These are guys that were supposed to be entertaining and fun. What are these guys thinking now? A lot of these guys came for Ron Jans, and now he's not here. So let's talk about where do they go from here. Brian, you clearly said they've got to find a coach here in the next 2 weeks. I don't see that happening, but maybe they'll get lucky. There are some names out there we've kind of thrown about.
Absolutely.
Kind of created a list of what we know of coaches who are currently out of work that could potentially be a fit. Brad, you had a couple takes today. I thought you brought up a good one in Dominic Torrent from New York City FC. I believe they were the Eastern Conference leaders a year ago. And,
yeah, they were.
He's out of work now. And is familiar with the Dutch system, is familiar with the 4-3-3, and playing out of the back. I know Gerard's not listening to the show, but if he is, man, that would be a nice get.
I mean, I still view this team as an attractive job. You've got a team that's heading into the new stadium. You've got owners that are willing to spend cash, and you've got half of the league in Major League Soccer that's still kind of stuck in that old age. Look at Dominic Trent, like you were saying. Great coach, spent a lot of time as Pep Guardiola's right-hand man at Barcelona, Bayern, and Man City. But he did a nice job in his year and a half at New York City FC. But he left him because he saw a lack of ambition. He saw an ownership that prioritized the team in the EPL. They weren't spending much money on players after they lost David Villa. They didn't replace him, and they were playing in the small confines of Yankee Stadium. I mean, that was not necessarily an attractive job, and I think that's why you saw him leave. You could see him come into Cincinnati. He gets to have a high-profile player like Jurgen Locadia. He gets to have an ownership group that's willing to splash some cash. So I think that's definitely somebody that should be one of Nightcamp's first phone calls in this search.
And they have a stadium.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, Coach, go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say that guy had to build a team, or basically two teams, one that could play in Yankee Stadium in the small, on a small field, and then another team that had to play away. I mean, that's tough for anybody.
Coach, we come to you now with the coach speak. Does Dom Torrent, could he fill in nicely here at FC Cincinnati?
Yeah, I think absolutely. But more interesting than throwing out names just because it's so early and we have no idea where Gerard is looking. Something that I've been thinking about is I think you're going to hear a lot of people thinking like, who knows the 4-3-3 or the Dutch system? And it's semi-important, but I think what's more important is to understand like a basic style of play, right? So the 4-3-3 is going to have like a midfield triangle that can rotate and do certain things and wingers that have certain roles, but all kind of formations that are looking to build out of the back or to hit quickly on the counter, to look at using a forward as a target player or looking at a forward to run off the back shoulder of a defender. Depending on the system that you're running, the kind of from there, the formation can be irrelevant as long as the philosophy is the same. And there's probably a fair amount of coaches. How many coaches do you hear when you say, hey, coach, what kind of style do you want your team to play? They're like, well, we want possession. We want to build out of the black. We want to, play beautiful soccer and all those things. So I think that a lot of coaches, when you're starting to build your team to be that, can play that way. I think Dome Torrent would be a fantastic hire. And, if I was making that choice, I might do that right now. I'm signed, sealed, and delivered. But from there, when you start getting away from the actual names and who are they going to hire, because we have no clue, starting to think about what coaches have coached a style of play that involves dynamic wingers, because we'll have those in Kubo and Regatin, a big center forward that can serve as a target, because we'll have that in Locadia, and have guys that have played in that sort of a system. And Torrent fits that, and there's probably a few others out there too right now. I'd like to see him go off the beaten path, though, if they don't get Torrent and get somebody that nobody's expecting.
Yeah, Coach Goff, you should be hired as head coach, man. Come on now, you're available, right?
I'm busy that day.
So go ahead, Brian.
Well, I think there's a couple buckets that people are gonna, or at least Nightcamp will look at. You're gonna have, I would say the personality bucket, that somebody who's going to be able to come in, command every single player's respect on that day one, and that might be some guys that seem like guys like the Mark Van Bommel or the Goose Hiddink, the Tony Pulses, guys who seem like this might be a little bit step below, but maybe somebody who's interested in getting back in the game. Then I think you also have another group. What you were saying there, Coach, is that the track record of that system, and he's maybe not necessarily a proven huge winner, but somebody knows and will work with Nightcamp, because the last thing I want to do is bring somebody in here that's not in lockstep with Nightcamp, and it's not gonna try to go behind his back to Jeff and get money or tell bad stories, stuff like that. I want these two with the coach in Nightcamp to to be absolutely on the same page when it comes here. And then I still think you don't rule it out yet, but like the MLS guy, like a Connor Casey, a James O'Connor, duck. Pablo Mastroeni, guys that have been around the league, know how things work, and can kind of get the job done. Connor Casey, as a an interim manager last year, got things done for Colorado, righted the ship a little bit, and I think that's somebody who might be able to figure out a way to win in this league.
Honestly, I would probably agree with you, Brian, if it weren't for the way that this job came up. And, Connor Casey replaced Anthony Hudson. The team had 2 points through 11 matches. The team just was not organized. They were not playing well. But in this case, we had a coach that left due to extenuating circumstances outside of the way that they were playing on the field. So I almost prioritize a coach that's going to come in with some cachet, like you mentioned earlier on Twitter earlier, like a Goose Hiddink or maybe a Van Bommel. Both of those guys, Goose Hiddink's got a great track record. He would command respect immediately in that locker room. So you would have the respect factor, and you wouldn't have to worry about the tactics factor. With a guy like Van Bommel, he did well his first season at PSV, and then he struggled, the beginning of this year. And when I mean struggled, he was fourth in the Eredivisie, but that wasn't up to their standard. But he had the track record being a Champions League winner as a player. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's key for FC Cincinnati, where I mean, if they were dealing with issues with quality on the field and organization, maybe I might think a Connor Casey or a James O'Connor. But at this point in time, I think you need to get a guy in there who's going to command respect on day one. He's not going to have to prove himself to earn the players' respect. I think that is a critical factor. And with those guys, I think it will take convincing to get them to come to Cincinnati, because just PSV to Cincinnati, that's not your, logical stepping stone. You want to go PSV to, that Van Bommel's looked at Hertha Berlin. Now that's a mess on its own, but you want to go from like an Eredivisie to a Premier League, a Bundesliga, a top tier club. I think Van Bommel would probably view MLS as a step back. Maybe you get Goose Hiddink on a 1-year deal to reestablish the baseline, and then allow FC Cincinnati to make a splash in 2021.
I saw this note on our page here from Aaron Bird. Nightcamp said it'll take a while and that it's difficult to get someone who can check every box. Johan is going to have a lot of experience as acting head coach by the time there's a Jan's replacement. So this is my question for Coach here. What is the difference between what Johan had to do last year and what Johan's going to have to do this year in his short run up?
I mean, we don't know the full extent of that because, last year it seemed pretty obvious that the locker room was just about completely lost to Koch. He didn't have a lot of guys left that were Koch guys. So Johan needed to gain the players' trust and say, look, I'm not that guy. And then kind of just lead the team forward, sort of stop the bleeding, gain some trust and go. This time, he's going to have a divided locker room. I said this before. I said that there's a rift in that locker room. It's guaranteed there's a rift. Now, is it 50-50? Are there two players that are on one side and everybody else on the other? We don't know. We don't know how big the rift is. We don't know how many players, but there is a rift. There's going to be people who were Jan's supporters. Maybe they're players that Jan's brought in, guys that he respected and respected him. And there's going to be players who Jan's rubbed the wrong way, even if it wasn't, this particular issue with the comments or being racially insensitive. It could be just they didn't get enough playing time. And that rift is there, and Johan is going to have to somehow bring those guys together and lead them forth into with a common goal. And I just think it's a really tough ask. But the one thing that Yo has going for him is that the players are much better now. It's a much better team than we had last year. And, I was texting with somebody who I trust in the coaching world who said, we don't need a coach that's a great tactical guy. Our guys are good enough to finish respectably. But what we need is a face of the franchise, somebody that's just going to get these guys playing together and build some confidence. We don't need somebody. We don't necessarily need a Tarrant or a Hiddink or anybody. We just need basically like a good man manager. It made me think of like what Carlo Ancelotti, and not pitching him as an option, obviously, with Everton, because he's with Everton. But, he's kind of known as that guy. People say, oh, he's not a great coach, but what he's really good at doing is getting players to play together. And he's had quite a lot of success doing that. Now, I don't think that wins us the MLS, but I think it could certainly help right the ship. And then it would have to be a short-term solution, though, because I think you do need a guy who can set the team up in certain ways and make adjustments if you really want to be successfully long-term.
I'll throw this to the Brads because they're big Spurs fans, but what about Poch?
Oh my gosh. Talking about people that we don't have any shot with.
Right.
I think the a factor in this whole process will be telling that coach, hey man, you have legitimately one, maybe two spots of bringing in a player that you're going to want this summer, maybe. And I could see that turning off some higher profile coaches. But then I also could see quite a few coaches looking at the core they have now and being pretty jazzed by it. I get a little worried that, we're waiting 5 weeks into the season and we're, 0-5, and then really kind of, not getting the guys we want. That kind of scares me a little bit. So that's another reason why I feel like, Nightcap needs to move fast.
We are getting some questions here in the chat room. We'll be live for a few more moments as we continue to get more of these chats. So make sure you send these in. This is from Stephen Morath. He wants our take on Michael Vanderwerf's comments today. I don't know if you three had a chance to read what he had to say, but do any of you have a take?
I can understand where he's coming from. He was basically said that Ron Jans didn't deserve this. I can understand where Vanderwerf was brought in by Ron. He's definitely more apt to side with Jans. Now, none of us from the locker room, none of us know the whole story, and I don't think the whole story is going to come out. But you can see how he was brought in. He was buying into a system. You saw a lot of progress. You saw a great result last week in a 1-0 win over Philadelphia. And I think that Vanderwerf probably thought things were going the right way. So I think I can at least see where he's coming from. I don't know if it's right or wrong. At this point in time, I think I lead towards you still got to move on from Jans with those statements, but you can see at least sympathetic to his view.
Yeah, and he seemed to be the person. There's a statement in the MLSPA release basically saying that several players may have been intimidated into their silence or intimidated, in a tough environment, and he seemed to not believe that was true. And that kind of gets me thinking of that there still could be a little bit of divide in that locker room, and maybe Vanderwerf's on one side and a couple players on the other.
One of the things that, while I see Vanderwerf's comment, and I understand they probably had a shared connection, they probably had shared respect, and he probably is generally grieving the loss of his coach. But the one thing that I just hesitate here, and I think that people have to learn, whether you're Dutch or American or any nationality, is that basically telling someone that what they feel is not true it's dangerous territory, especially if you've never felt that. And by saying Ron's didn't deserve this, he's basically looking at whoever made those complaints, whoever's been offended by Ron's, and saying, you shouldn't be so offended. And I will never look at, my wife who says, she comes home and says, man, this guy said this to me at a client's office today, and it really bothered me. I would never look at her and be like, oh, that's not a big deal. He's just kidding around. Number one, because she'd smack me. But even beyond that, the point is I will never know what it's like to be, whether you want to say like sexually harassed or looked down on for my gender in that way. I'm never going to know what it's like to be a minority. So I'm not saying that I can't empathize and understand how people feel, but I'm saying I'm never going to comment on whether a minority should be offended or not by something somebody said, because that's not my role. I'm never going to have to deal with that. I'll leave them to decide whether they're offended or not. I'll apologize if I offended them. And after that, I get that Vanderwerf is grieving for his coach, but I think that's just going to, speaking out in that way is just going to divide the locker room more. And if he wants to be a team leader, I hope that behind closed doors, maybe he's publicly defending Ron to kind of throw his coach a bone, but behind closed doors, I hope he's saying, look, guys, I get it. But as we move forward here, we have each other's backs. Maybe our coach said these things, but that wasn't us. So like our coach or don't like our coach, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
And we're continuing to read your comments here in the chat, so make sure you do get in touch if you have questions or comments that you want read. We will get to some of these here. This is from Jack Wall on Facebook. It says, Johan doesn't seem like a leader to me. Hope I'm wrong, but I don't see him uniting the team.
He's not a a Koch or a Jans where he's friendly and open with the media. He's extremely more reserved. He's a young guy that's just been thrown into the spotlight twice
Publicly.
And yeah, well,
we don't know, or we're guessing. Maybe on the field, the training pitch,
well,
maybe
yeah,
he's a little different. But you're right. From a media standpoint, I agree with you 100%, Bri.
yeah. So I think that's. I don't know if that doesn't scream that he's a leader or not. There's many different types of leaders, and his leadership got us through an extremely rough patch and set us up for a good, final 7-8 games under Jan. So, yeah, he's not a guy who I view as our long-term leader, but I think is somebody that can check the boxes. His tactical acumen's good enough to get us, to a point where we do have a full-time signing.
This question comes in from Twitter, from Ryan Egger. It says, does the coach need to be a current coach? Could be big name former player that wants his first job. But I think there was a couple comments after that in regards to the coaching license. Being a former player only gets you so far from a licensing standpoint, Coach. But and off the top of my head, I don't know of any former players that are looking out there. The only former player that comes to mind that has MLS experience with Brad Friedel, but that didn't turn out well in New England. Different situation there.
Yeah.
But from a licensure standpoint, where does a coach who wants to coach in Major League Soccer have to be?
Yeah, I love this. So first, let's stop all this talk about all of this stuff and let me just bash on licensing for an hour because I hate some of that.
Sounds like a topic for another podcast that you might be doing here.
Yeah, maybe. Hint, hint. But, I don't know the exact rules. My guess is they have to be A licensed. I mean, there's license requirements for everything. So A licensed or equivalent, even to just coach like U12 club at a top level now, you have to have a D license. So my guess is you have to have a license. But I wouldn't be that surprised if players who are interested in coaching either already have that or are on their way. But that's exactly what I meant when I said they're going to have to go off the beaten path and get a coach if they want to get somebody quick. That's not a guy like Dome Turrent is, whether it's a former player, whether it's, an assistant, not even a first assistant, maybe a second assistant or somewhere that wants his first head coaching job. I think that's the way you can go out and get somebody quick. I think other than that, you're looking at retreads or has-beens or people that have been fired, and that just gets dangerous. I'm not saying there's nobody out there. Obviously, we've been talking about Turrent, but there's just it's slim pickings when you talk about coaches that that have the experience already required that are not currently working.
Hey, Hoyt's open.
Steve Cherundolo.
What's he up to these days?
I think he didn't get fired. Well, I guess technically he got fired, but when the last staff at Hanover, I think he was asked to move on as well. So I know there's a point where he was being I think they called him a guest assistant coach for the U.S. men's national team. So I'd love to see somebody like him. Another name, Chris Hutton,
formerly of Brighton.
Exactly. I think that could be a name that you could see. And he had success relative for them, but, he was there for 5 seasons. I mean, there's guys out there. Is it extremely realistic? I don't know, but I think you go and ask every single one of those guys. Or you could have my, favorite Sunderland head coach, Gus Poyet.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, no.
Yeah. Houghton's an interesting one. He got Newcastle promoted from the Championship up to the Premier League, and then was sacked. And then, did well with Brighton as well, got them promoted and kept them up. And, Liam Malone is saying Tony Pulis.
James O'Connor.
Tony Pulis would be a tough one for me. And the reason for that is he is definitely a park the bus kind of coach. He is going to make a defensive, drag it out, just an ugly type match. Whereas I think with the FC Cincinnati, and I'm just guessing here, the fan base, we want to see attacking, flowing football. We want to see goals scored. We don't want to see 0-0s or 1-0s. We want to see goals. So I don't know if Tony Pulis really fits what we're, as a fan base, are currently looking for. I could be way wrong and watch him get hired next week.
Brad, I think there's a rumor that just came out about a certain coach.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how accurate it is at that point, but yeah, I think it was at the Boca Juniors recently let go their coach Gustavo Alfaro, and you're seeing a couple outlets out of Argentina mention that he is interested, and maybe there might be some interest between both parties of coming to Major League Soccer. Like I said, I'm not sure how accurate this one is. I think the other day said he was looking at Chivas. Definitely a guy that has some pedigree. I don't know how he would fit because I don't believe he's managed outside of South America, but we'd see how he would fit. Coming from a big club like that, he would definitely bring some credibility to the locker room.
We got this from Facebook from Kevin Kuth. He says, "Is the Stam talk real?" He's referring to Jaap Stam. I don't see that happening. Pretty sure that Nijkamp and Stam might have had some issues when Stam was the head coach at Pexwola. I could be wrong about that, but
I believe Stam's quote was Pegswalla is run like an amateur club. So, yeah, I doubt the fact that he's going to be coming here.
Let's see here. We've got a few more questions for us. So if you're watching live, please continue to send them in. We really appreciate it. Chris Huning on Twitter. This is an interesting name, and I actually kind of threw it around to the CST staff earlier today. But what about Jill Ellis?
Okay, a couple things here. You need, if you're going to take a risk like that, and I think she's a wonderful coach, you need to have a solid core, a leadership core of players in the locker room. And with all the fractures and everything, I think that would be an extremely large ask. And this is kind of where I also look at, Alfaro as well as he'd be taking on a extremely new task in a country where I don't know if he speaks the English language or not, but the clear communication route is something that's going to need to happen with this with this coach, with this group of players, and it's just another question mark factor to bring in, and that scares me. So I'd like to limit as many random circumstances with this hire that we can possibly avoid.
Coach, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would love for FCC to make a hire like that, something like hiring a female coach or a minority coach. Just, going out of the box like that, something that not a lot of MLS teams have done yet. I would wonder if it would be a smart move for Jill Ellis, because we've seen what happens with a lot of coaches that come in from non-traditional places. So in this case, it would be a female coaching in the MLS. That's not a traditional thing. What happens is if they experience a little bit of a lack of success, they're torched for it. And, this team is not going to be set up for success regardless of who comes in, because there's going to be a betting in, that has to happen. There's already going to be a rift in the locker room you have to put together. You're going to have all these new players be learning to play together already. And then you're probably going to be changing some styles or some patterns of play. So, Jill would not be set up for success. And that would worry me just from how much she would get kind of blamed for FCC's lack of preparation for this season.
Zach wants to... Oh, go ahead, Brian.
This is just popping up to me. Does it surprise you guys, either of you three, that Ivar Van Dinteren wasn't named the interim head coach and Johan was? I mean, this is a guy that's managed in the USL. He's managed in the second league over in the Netherlands, and yet he's going to be the assistant to Johan. I was very surprised by that statement.
I wasn't surprised, only because Yo did it a year ago, right? So for me, I think that would be, if you're trying to right the ship now, if you were to not give it to Yo, that would be...
You'd have to dismiss him.
Right. That'd be a big slap in the face to Yo, and it would just send a message to the club or to the team that, hey, we like Yo, but we don't want him. That would be a tough thing to do.
I think Yo's got an elite level license too. I think
he
does.
Got
the top license, so that might be one of the reasons.
Can I also say, why was one of the reasons that Nijkamp gave for having Yo be the interim manager last season? It's to bring a good feeling back to the club, is what Nykamp said. So clearly they see something in DeMay that is a uniter of people. And right, we have not seen him be out there and be like a forceful leader of men or anything. But, you know, if he has a lot of friends in that locker room from a lot of different backgrounds, maybe he could be that uniter, and maybe he could bring a good feeling back to the club. So I don't know anything about Ivar, so it's tough for me to tell like what kind of leader he would be. But I can't imagine that he would have the trust of as many people as DeMay has, since DeMay has kind of been front and center in that locker room already.
You got to think too. Ivar was brought in with Jan, so he's probably viewed as one of Jan's guys versus maybe DeMay's an objective observer.
This question coming in from Dan Albers on YouTube. This is, do you see us keeping the 4-3-3 formation this team was building on? It'd be awfully tough to change right now, less than 2 weeks away from the season kicking off, Coach.
Yeah, I think that it depends on what you change to. I think changing from a 4-3-3 to a 4-2-3-1 is sort of just some basic adjusting. Even changing like a 4-4-2, you're talking about sort of minor adjustments. Now, if you start to play like a 3-back, a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3, or like a Brazilian box midfield, a 4-4-2 diamond, anything that requires a lot of understanding of whether your partners on the field are going to be, then it would be a lot tougher to make that switch. So I think that we're going to see either the 4-3-3 or a variation of it that has, you know, two wide players that are going to be highly involved in the attack and some sort of a midfield triangle, whether it be two midfielders and a reserved striker or three midfielders. So I think it'll be a variation, if nothing else.
Wesley Jackson brings up an interesting one on YouTube. I don't know if they could pull this off or if they would want to do this, but hire DeBoer from Atlanta. Can we trade Gam for him? You could have our entire super draft for next year.
Isn't he in the CONCACAF Champions League?
He is, yes.
Yeah, that'd be tough.
Would be tough. This is from Matthew Kaiser. Do you think that at this point, with it being stated that they think it is a systemic problem, that Jeff Birding should also resign? You know, that's awfully tough, right? Jeff clearly wears his emotions on his sleeve for this club and what it means to him and what it means to the city. I can make the argument that I don't know if there's been a person in Cincinnati sports in the last decade who has striven, if that's even a word, to bring a championship to this town. You know he wants it bad, right? I can't say that about Mike Brown. I can't say that about Bob Castellini. Now, I know the Reds have gone out and spent, but it's clear since 2016 that Jeff Birding has one goal, and that is to bring a championship to this town. There have been missteps, no doubt about it. But I don't fault him for, A, bringing us FC Cincinnati in the first place, and B, getting to Major League Soccer, building the West End. I mean, this is what he's done is remarkable. I don't want people to forget that. And it seems like in the last 48 hours, people have.
Well, you have to give him some credit for acknowledging and kind of getting to that situation where, you know, Jans did resign, but at least that was kind of, it seemed like more of a mutual understanding there. I think my question with him is on the subject of, has he been straight with the fan base and straight with the media in all facets of his dealings? And I think a lot of that comes down to this past week when Friday, when the news broke with Pat, his comment was, you know, it only seemed to be from, you know, the using the word in the locker room, and of course apparently it was more than that. So I think he kind of maybe faulted a little bit there, but I can't imagine thinking it's a good thing right now to remove him from this equation.
We didn't get go ahead, Coach.
No, I just want to say, you know, if you go back 2 weeks, who would be complaining about Gerard Nykamp right now? I mean, not me. I've really liked what he's done this offseason, the kind of pieces he's brought in, going out and getting a guy like Locadia who is well regarded and worth quite a bit of money. on the loan deal, so it's low risk for us. I mean, he's done a lot of really good work, and Birding made that hire. So I kind of look at this, and I'm not washing Birding's hands because last year's roster build wasn't great, and maybe he didn't do a ton of due diligence with trying to make sure that Nijkamp vetted Ron Jans appropriately. But this hire, I think, is on Nijkamp. Nijkamp had history with Jans, and Nijkamp was the general manager making the hire. So this is on him. And again, I'm not blaming Nijkamp either because we still don't know exactly what happened. So I don't want to say that Nijkamp did a wrong thing with hiring Ron Jans. I don't think Birding should resign because I think there's enough blame to go around here for everyone. And I think once we start going, Friday Night Massacre here and trying to say like, oh, everybody who has any blame in this organization, let's just get rid of them. We're not going to have an organization left.
Yeah.
I mean, the Browns, they really want to win, but
Sure.
they suck at it every year. So
Yeah.
It's got to be a leash at some point.
You're talking about the Cleveland Browns?
Yes.
Okay, because
Yes.
when you say the Browns, that could be the Brown
Sorry.
family and the Bengals. You know what I'm saying there?
Yes.
I'm not taking shots or anything. This came in from Twitter. This is from Chris Hubbard. It says, I was a little put off that Lindner did not appear today at the press conference as an owner. Do you feel he should have been there with all of the chaos that has ensued?
Yeah, I tweeted this earlier today. If I spent $500 million, or my ownership group spent $500 million, and one of the faces of my organization had a massive allegation against him that caused his removal, you best believe I'd be front and center. So I am disappointed now. I don't know exactly where he's at this point in time, if he's around, but you know what? The buck ultimately rolls up to him, and for him not to be there, it was disappointing to me. I think he owes that to the fan base. He's done a lot of positive stuff. He's put his money where his mouth is, but still, in a situation like this, he had an opportunity to really nip this in the bud, and for him to not show up and put it on Birding and Nijkamp, even though they're the two guys in charge, I think it's a missed opportunity.
Now, we don't know if Lindner's in town. We don't know the situations. Right? I mean, I'm assuming he was out of town and that's why he wasn't there. That's a big assumption. We don't know.
Dude's got $2 billion in a private plane. He could have been back.
I can't really argue that, Bri. But I that is disappointing. Yeah, I mean, that's when it's your club, you probably should be there. But again, we don't know the circumstances. So I'll just leave it at that. But I do see your point, Chris and Brad and Brian. Let's see here. Any other comments that I'm missing? This is from Pat Kiernan on Facebook. It says, no Jeff, no FCC. That's the bottom line.
Yep.
Some nonsense being spoken here. Bring in a token coach. Cop yourselves on. Yeah, I mean, without Jeff Birding, we're not talking about FC Cincinnati playing 2 weeks from now in New Jersey. It doesn't happen. So he's not going anywhere. A lot of people are upset with him, and I think there are some fair criticisms of Jeff, but I'm not going to fault him for doing whatever he can to make sure this team is successful. And that's the way I look at Jeff. So that's just my 2 cents there. Yeah. I think that's about it for the evening, gents. A lot of great comments tonight on Facebook. Thank you to all the folks who tuned in live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Really appreciate all of your comments. And again, if you're listening to this after the fact, or if you're watching live and you still have more to add, feel free to email us at feedback@cincinnati-soccertalk.com. I guess we'll wrap up because this is a good question that just came in. This is from Sam on Twitter. How do you think Locadia feels? He's a loan to sign, but why sign with a club that has this now?
$1 million or $8 million question right there, Sam. Maybe $10 million question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all going to depend on how this team feels at the end of that loan spell, and it's going to feel completely different. Whether it's way worse or way better it remains to be seen. But if they go out and hire Tarrant, and he gets Locadia scoring goals and he gets Locadia with some service, Locadia is going to want to stay. I mean, it's not going to be like, oh, well, when I first got here, the coach resigned, so now no matter what happens from this point on, I'm not signing. And that's the whole point. Same with, season tickets, fans, everything. It's going to depend on where they go from here. We're all upset. Locadia can't be thrilled. Anybody who recently got here can't be thrilled. You were signed as Ron Jan's guy if you're Pedersen, if you're any of these guys, and now he's not here. So it can't be thrilling. But if they put their foot in the ground and move forward one step at a time and go hire somebody that really gets the team believing that they can win, then those guys are going to want to stay and want to play for that guy.
Yeah,
Rob?
I mean,
Or woman.
I was going to say, one of the things we haven't talked about is still where this team is over where they were last year. I mean, we have 5 or 6 players easily better than our best player in Alan Cruz last year, already on this team, already on this roster. So I think that even with DeMay, this team is going to be a lot better. I don't think that, even after we've lost John, I don't think we've gone off the cliff. I don't think the season's over. There's still so much time that can be made up. Like I said earlier, Colorado got, 2 points from their first 12 matches, and they missed the playoffs by 6 lone points. So I think there's still plenty of opportunity for FC Cincinnati with this roster, with the way it's come together. I still feel pretty positive. Doesn't mean that I don't feel these black eyes that we've had over the last couple of days, but I still think I'm pretty positive on the club.
I lied. I've got one more comment here from Twitter. This is from Rob Burkhart. You guys still haven't talked about the possibility of Nightcamp leaving.
I'd be very surprised at this moment. I mean, this guy's made so many correct moves. I'd let him dive down in that magic bag he has somehow and see if he can pull out another rabbit. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't think. I think if Nightcamp would be gone, I don't think he would have been on the stage with Birding today.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even though he did look like death up there, like it was not his finest moment.
They both did not look.
Yeah.
Did not look great. You could tell there's been a lot of sleepless nights over the last few days. So
yeah. Birding would be insane to fire Nightcamp at this point, and if Nightcamp was going to resign over Ron Jan's being asked to resign or his resignation being accepted, it would have happened already.
All right. Good stuff tonight, gents. Again, thank you for all the comments and questions. As we wrap things up, I will throw it to you, Coach. Why don't you talk a little bit about talking tactics with Coach Goff?
Talking tactics with Coach Goff. Finally, a little goodness in our day today.
Yeah.
I'm really excited that I am going to be doing my own podcast through the CST platform with Subs producing and releasing it once a week here. It's going to be Talking Tactics with Coach Goff. Not sure that it's an Apple Podcast feed yet, is it, Subs?
Nah, we're still waiting for approval there.
Okay, but you can find it on Spotify and Stitcher already. The first episode will show up in your CST feed, so go on and subscribe to the CST podcast if you haven't already. And then from there, I'm gonna have my own feed, but it's gonna be a coach's look at the game. So it's gonna be we'll talk about tactics and about what's going on in FC Cincinnati games and other things throughout the world of soccer. But it's also gonna be talk about just general coaching ideas, coach speak, what I think's going on inside of the locker room. And in fact, I addressed this Ron Jan situation in episode 1. So make sure you keep an eye out for that.
And of course, if you want to subscribe, if say you're using an app like Overcast or Pocket Casts, we will provide the link to subscribe in this week's show notes as well. You can find it over at the episode that we did last night with Pat Brennan from the Cincinnati Enquirer, and we'll also post it as well for this episode too. Coach, appreciate you being on. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. If we can't come together and process things like that today, then what is the point of being a fan base?
Well said, Coach. Final thoughts, Brad Weigel?
Hey, Soups, I appreciated this. It was good finally to be live once again and getting some interaction with some of our listeners. So I'm glad we were able to come together. I wish it was under some better circumstances. And I mentioned this on the last main show that I was on. It's all about how the team bounces back. And I think that there's a lot of talent on this roster. There's a lot of experience. I think that's going to be one of the bonuses with FC Cincinnati has with players like Meduyanin and Vanderwerf and Waston and Garza, that these guys have been through. They've been through a lot of situations already. So I think that it's going to be how they bounce back. Ultimately, I think realistically, I think that FC Cincinnati was going to have a slow start to the season with a lot of chemistry issues, building the familiarity between the players, learning each other's runs. So I think if you were looking at a team that was going to be top tier competitor and they relied on the coaching staff a lot more, I think this would be a massive issue. But I think there's still plenty of time to rebound and still have a successful season.
Good stuff, Brad. As always, appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks, Subes.
Oh, you got to love it. Brad always gives me grief about the live show being gone. Now Mom in the chat room giving me grief as well. Thanks, Mom. Appreciate that.
Step it up, Mama Subes.
Steal my thunder, pal.
Sorry. Brian, your final thoughts?
Well, I was going to give you 3 thoughts before you cut me off.
Go for it.
So I was going to say, first off, if you like the live show, make sure to give Nick Suberling a lot of crap on Twitter because that'll be awesome. Secondly, let's all really be careful on what labels we throw at people. We all disagree. I think there's right. I think there's wrong. I think there's certain gray areas. A lot of things were wrong about this subject. But really, let's just be careful what labels we throw out there and what terms we throw out there. There's a certain yellow card chant that comes out of the Bailey that uses the C word, and I absolutely hate it. I think it's something that we should absolutely look to avoid at all costs in the future. Eliminate that part of that chant. It's just, there's more ways for us to look bad in things that are just absolutely unnecessary and wrong to say. And if you're in the Bailey, you might disagree with me. Please tell me if you do. But I'd really like to see if we can eliminate that in the future. Just set a take there. And then my final take is this league is not perfect. And there's a lot of bad things going on there. And one of those things that I feel like I kind of disagree with as well is human rights violations going on in Qatar with them building their World Cup bids. And now they are a huge sponsor, it seems like, of Inter Fort Lauderdale, Inter Miami, whatever.
AC,
they don't get
AC
sued.
Miami.
AC Miami, they're going to get sued anyway. But yeah, so there's a lot of things, and Ron saying a word is terrible. I think we should also push, if we can, to pressure Miami on eliminating their negative relationships, which tit for tat, I guess you could say. But yeah, so that's just something I feel that's very important. Shout out to Peach Riley on that. So,
oh man, how do I follow that? That was good, Brian. I'll say this. I was apprehensive about doing this show tonight for a couple reasons. The things I've seen on social media over the past, I don't know, I guess 3 or 4 days since this news came out. Some of the comments have been absolutely appalling. We're better than that, right? Cincinnati, it was better than that. A lot of fighting amongst ourselves. I really hope that fans of this club, whether you agree with the decision to Jant's leaving, whether you agree whether or not Jeff Birding should be in charge, I think what we can all agree on is that we love FC Cincinnati. And let's remember that. Let's just come together, get ready for what should be a fun season. We're less than 12 days away from actual soccer being played that we're going to be able to see on television, or if you happen to make the trip to New Jersey, you'll actually be able to get to see FC Cincinnati play. And so I'm super thankful for that. As always, I'm super thankful for the fans of our show who read our articles and follow us on social media and comment. I appreciate everybody's opinions. Where I draw the line, or where I have a real hard time, is when you attack other fans and or attack other people's livelihood, whether you're a journalist, a TV reporter. We're better than that, FCC fans. We really are. And I hope that we can all get past this, move forward together, and get behind this club because Lord knows they're going to need it. That's going to do it for this special edition of CST. My thanks to Coach Goff, Brad Weigel, and Brian Weigel. I'm Subes, reminding you to watch your tackles. We'll see you all next week.